Hello, everybody, and welcome to What's App, a space for Asian American progressive voices in California. This week, we have a special episode for Lunar New Year's. My name is Albert Kachapum, and joining us today is everyone, which includes the co-host and the producer. So, without further ado, let's give everyone a warm welcome.
Hi, Rex here, queer Asian American male living in Bay Area, California.
This is Ji Young Park, also known as Carolyn Park. I am in Los Angeles, which is Tongva Chumash Kiz indigenous lands, and I am Korean American.
Awesome. All right. Here's a voice that you may not have heard before. Jackie Ho, producer.
Hi all, I'm Jackie. I guess I got roped into producer. Cut that out. Anyway.
No, I like it.
Keep it in, even the cut it out part.
Anyways, I guess I'm technically Chinese American, though my parents are from Taiwan. So depending how you feel, could be Taiwanese American. And I have nothing more to say. What's up?
Awesome. Well, I think we all have something to say about Lunar New Year. How do you greet each other in your language?
Gong hei fat choi, but that is the Cantonese version, and it does not actually mean Happy New Year.
Okay.
What does it mean?
Well, I don't actually speak Cantonese, but we have, being Viet, we have a very similar way of saying a lot of the same phrases. The Vietnamese version is Gong hei phat bai, which I don't recall what Gong hei means, because it's an older form of Vietnamese that is more related to Chinese rather than Vietnamese itself. But phat bai means to gain wealth, and I think Gong hei might be something along the lines of getting prosperity.
Yeah, that's what I learned it as. Something about may you be prosperous, may you have prosperity. 恭喜发财 for Chinese, Mandarin Chinese.
So Koreans say, I don't know why everything in Korean is so long, but for New Year's, you're supposed to wish your elders a Happy New Year by bowing to them and also saying Happy New Year in Korean, which is 새해 복 많이 받으세요, which is saying, I hope that you have many blessings in the new year.
Nice. So
good fortune.
Oh, that's very similar to, I think, the other translations that Jackie and Rex have mentioned. So that is the welcome. So
well, we do actually also have how to actually say Happy New Year as a greeting and not as a blessing, which is Chúc mừng năm mới in Vietnamese, which is straight up just Happy New Year.
Gotcha.
Same. We also have a 新年快乐, as you said. Happy New Year.
Korean equivalent or no?
I think no. There's it's 새해 복 많이 받으세요, and then the informal is 새해 복 많이 받아.
So is it used the same for Lunar New Year and Western New Year, or is it different in Korean?
I think people do say it for the Western New Year as well. I think it has less significance depending on how Americanized your particular family is.
I see. Makes sense.
I know Viet folks also say Chúc mừng năm mới for Western New Year, but it's kind of rare and it just doesn't have as much cultural significance. When we say that, we literally just mean it, and there's no blessings associated with it. Yeah.
I see. Jackie, have you noticed anything similar or?
No, let's say it's 2021 and then we just say the same thing, 新年快乐. It's like Happy New Year. But I guess technically for us, Chinese New Year is also called 春节, which is this spring festival, I guess, or spring holiday. But I don't recall people saying 春节快乐. I mean, maybe they do that elsewhere, but in my family, we haven't We don't say it like that.
There's a whole song that's associated with the spring coming in Viet. So,
Oh.
yeah, around the Bay Area, there's a huge Vietnamese population. So people also know Lunar New Year by its Vietnamese name, which is Tet. The thing about Tet is we also have multiple Tet, but only this one is the one that's actually celebrating a new year. The other ones are more festivals. This one's the spring Tet to welcome the spring, and we also have a mid-autumn festival that's also a Tet. Tet Trung Thu. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so just to backtrack a little bit, my culture is Thai. Therefore, we actually don't celebrate Lunar New Year. We have very similar to other Southeast Asian countries, kind of like a spring New Year as well. We call it Songkran, and that's in April. It's essentially the Thai New Year, and we also have a different year system. So it's like 2,557 or something right now in the Thai solar New Year. So in your face, AD, Ado, Domino, whatever, we've already passed 2000 a long time ago.
Wait, so you don't use lunar?
We don't use lunar. We also use solar.
I see.
But our solar, because we're in the Southeast, starts a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does that mean you're like way older than you are in our regular Gregorian years?
Ouch. Let's not get into that subject of age because that's very touchy. First question is, how does your family observe the holiday and or festival?
All right, I guess I'll go first. Before COVID, I guess. Before pandemic, woohoo. I have a lot of family in the Bay Area. We're all clustered together, kind of, except for a couple in different states. But everyone who's here, we would all meet up at one person's house, one of my aunts or uncles. And usually it's my uncle because he's got the really long table that can seat a ton of people around it and put a lot of food on it. So everyone would bring like one or two dishes, and the host family would make a couple more. And then there'd also be like these stereotypical Chinese candies on the table and chocolates and stuff. And everyone would just go over and we just hang out and eat food. And then after a while, you know, when the going gets good, it's like, oh boy, time for the red envelopes. And all the kids would like line up behind like or in front of certain aunts or uncles and then start reciting those four-worded idioms to them of like, oh, Happy New Year, peace and prosperity, may you be rich, blah, 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 and stuff like that. And then aunts and uncles would be like, oh, thank you. May your school year be very good and may you stay healthy and stuff like that. And you get red envelopes and just go around doing that for the rest of the night until you're done and you go back to eating. That was my my celebration.
My family's is pretty similar. You know what? We actually would do it on the American New Year for some reason. Even though my grandmother, well, RIP, she passed away the year before last, but even and she passed away at actually 99 years of age. And up until her death, she actually celebrated her birthdays according to the Lunar New Year. And she was really the matriarch of my mother's side of the family. But somehow we ended up celebrating according to the Gregorian calendar. So, which is, you know, what Americans use. And so what we would do is we would meet up at somebody's house, some relative's house. And the traditional meal for New Year's for Koreans is what's called dokguk. It's a rice cake soup. And there are different shapes of rice cakes, but the Korean one is oval shaped for New Year's. And that symbolizes coins, which symbolizes prosperity. So if you have noodles, it's considered bad luck because it basically means that prosperity will slip away from you. And so, we have rice cake soup, and we do sebe, which is the custom of bowing to your elders and wishing them a happy new year. And when I was younger, we used to dress up. That was like an excuse to dress up in our hanbok, which is the Korean traditional dress, in like bright colors. And then what else? We also played a game called Yutnori, which is like a board game. Not necessarily on a board. We would draw it, and it goes in a square. And they have like little pieces that you move for each team. And then there are 4 sticks with like different symbols on them, and you throw them in the air and they land a certain way. And that how they land determines how many spaces you go forward or you can go backwards. It's actually really fun. And it was actually one of the few activities that I could do with my family other than eat. So eating was like one of like the only things that I had in common with my extended family, and even my nuclear family. And then playing this game was like the only like even when we were eating, it would be like the kids section and then the adult section. And then the Yutnori, this game was like the only time that we all interacted together doing something fun. So actually that was like one of my fondest memories of family activities and customs.
Well, it is my favorite holiday, and like for the previous, like Ji-young and Jackie says before, like the way my family celebrates, it's really similar. We would line up in front of the elders as kids. The kids would line up in front of the elders, and we would bow. But our bow for elders is a bit different in where we actually fold our arms in front of us, and then we wish them long life, prosperity, health. I like to change it up and make mine like over the top and ridiculous, like wish them wealth and immortality. And in turn, they'll wish us like good schooling and the typical stuff you would wish to kids in Asian households. And afterwards, a lot of us would there is a generational divide that the kids would eat at their own separate tables and the adults would at their own separate tables. But as I've gotten older, and also I'm in Viet American organizing circles, I do get to see like different styles of celebrating the new year that I didn't celebrate or didn't notice being celebrated as a kid. Like, for example, we do have games and it involves money. A lot of gambling happens with the New Year's money.
You know what? We did gamble when we were playing Yutnori too.
Oh, yes. There's normal card games, which Viets love, is Dinglan, or 13 in English. That's a common card game, but that's not specifically a New Year's game. The most well-known would be Bakuok, I think. I don't know the exact name. So there's a bunch of there's pictures. There's a mat with several animals laid out, and you have dice corresponding to those animals, and the house would roll the dice, and you would bet on what animal it would land on. You would bet money, and it sounds really simple, but when you're like with a group of folks, it just is really fun. Just don't gamble all your money away. And money, the lise, is one of the most well-known aspects of Lunar New Year. and it's probably one of the reasons why it's my favorite holiday, because I was once a greedy ass little kid, and after you bless your elders, they give you money. And nowadays we don't do any more of the lining up. I can drive around and just like go directly to my uncle's house and just bow and do the blessings there, and he just gives it to me. No need for a huge gathering, especially during COVID times.
So I forgot to say that when the younger people bow to their elders to wish them a happy new year, the younger people do get envelopes with money, but they're not red envelopes. They're just like regular envelopes. And so I remember as a kid, just like loving the holiday season, because not only did I have Christmas, but then New Year's was like a week later, and then you get more money. And that was just like the greatest thing.
Yeah. My extended family and I never really switched over to the Western Gregorian calendar. So how I see like Christmas versus Lunar New Year is always like, as a younger kid, it was always in opposition.
Wait, so you got Ji-young, you got envelopes on the Gregorian New Year?
Yeah, somehow we ended up celebrating New Year on the Gregorian calendar.
Interesting. But then you said your grandma was celebrating still on Lunar Year, right?
Yeah, so like I said, up until her death, she counted her age by the Lunar New Year and celebrated her birthday on by the lunar calendar.
So technically, she could have been over 100 if you counted over the Gregorian one, then, right?
No,
I don't think so. I think there's still 1-for-1 years. Like the timing shifts.
Yeah, the months are different.
Yeah.
Overall, it's pretty similar.
Well, for us, it's 1 year earlier, I think, for Viet, because apparently it starts in conception if you're using the lunar calendar.
Oh my gosh, Koreans
rather than
do that
birth.
too.
Yeah, but I meant like the period of a year, like, Gregorian's like 365. Lunar is like not quite the same, but I think it's very close.
Yeah, the time period. But Koreans do that too, where you're already a year old when you're born.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, and that's how we traditionally do it. I don't think that's how it is on paper anymore.
When you guys brought up games, it totally reminded me that sometimes they would play mahjong, but I was too young to get involved because I'm the youngest. So sometimes my older cousins or the adults would play mahjong, and we could just watch from the side or something.
Yeah, Rex, I think we have to cut out that part where you talk about the Vietnamese game, because somebody's going to turn it into a $500 game.
That's true. Well, anyways. My question, actually unrelated to, is what are your thoughts on calling it, or what are your thoughts when you hear people call it Chinese New Year? And feel free to talk a little bit about that. Let's get into the politics a little bit.
I mean, we don't really call... Where is Gregory from? The guy who made this calendar we all follow. Like Italy, we don't really call regular New Year, well, solar Western New Year, the Italian New Year or something. I don't know. Like there's the fact that Vietnam, with Vietnamese folks, there's this sort of nationalism when it comes to the fact we're kind of uncomfortable that we've been colonized for 1,000 years, and a lot of our traditions and parts of our language do come from our colonizer. And by not calling it Chinese New Year, it's a way to reclaim and take away that shared tradition that we do celebrate at the same time, but also to make it our own.
Right. Just to back up for a second. So you're telling me that the Lunar New Year was a remnant of the Chinese colonization? Is that true? Is that correct?
It well, we were colonized for 1,000 years, and the nations that do celebrate Lunar New Year is China and those who have been colonized by the Chinese.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting too, why Thai people don't celebrate it then, because
like geographically we're in Southeast Asia, and we've had contacts with a lot of the Southeast Asian nations there. But if you look at Vietnamese architecture and cultural clothing, cultural styles before Westernization, it was not Southeast Asian. It was not very Indian and Hindu influence. It was more like the rest of East Asia with the flared roofs and imperial style Chinese rule and imperialism. So
so to your point, I agree that we shouldn't really call it Chinese New Year. But that's coming from an outsider perspective. So
I mean, Koreans are hella nationalistic because Korea has been colonized and attacked by so many different countries throughout history. Like the fact that this small country and this group of peoples has been able to maintain its own culture is pretty remarkable. And so while I think Koreans do acknowledge that a lot of Korean culture comes from Chinese culture, they don't just say, I mean, Korean culture is very distinct from Chinese culture as well. So Koreans definitely don't call it Chinese New Year. It's just, it has its own name. That's a Korean name. That's Seollal. I don't think that Koreans don't think of it as a Chinese holiday, for sure.
Yeah. I don't think anyone really thinks of it as a Chinese holiday. Even the Chinese, like that's a thing.
Don't call it Chinese New Year.
Yeah, we just call it New Year. When it's brought westward, it's just white people can't tell the difference.
That's true.
That's a good point. I do agree that for both Jiyoung's point and Rex's point about the culture being repeatedly assaulted. I mean, in Korea's case, to the point where they basically split the country into two.
In a proxy war between the Soviet Union and the U.S.
Yeah, which almost happened in Vietnam. I mean, to be honest.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's a lot of,
with us, the Soviet won that proxy war. So
yeah, exactly. And
the refugees that got here has never let it go, which I'm part of that wave. So
right. Yeah. So
does anybody actually know why it's called Lunar New Year? Like, what does Lunar New Year mean?
Well, I mean, doesn't it follow the lunar calendar? Like, whenever it's the new year on the lunar calendar, it's the Lunar New Year.
But right? What is the lunar calendar? What does that mean?
I think the months correspond, like in a lunar calendar, it more accurately corresponds with the moon. Like a month is actually a month and not. Whereas when you're using the Western solar calendar, like the Chinese calendar and all the calendars that we used back then was still like a solar calendar in that each year was the time the Earth went around the sun. But with a lunar calendar, it's still that, but the months are more accurate to the phases of the moon, or not phases of the moon, but like when the moon goes around the Earth. So that's why it's called a lunar calendar, because it follows a lunar cycle. But in the West, the months are forced to be evenly divided and put into a 12-month year cycle.
Right. According to Wikipedia, in fact, Lunar New Year's are lunar solar New Years. Or
Yeah.
lunisolar calendars, which just means, like, to Rex's point, or to what Rex is saying, it seems like these are more accurate representations according to the moon rather than just like the number of days in a quote unquote year. But yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I think
I mean,
I'm glad that you asked that.
If you call it a month, why is it not related to the moon?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's crazy too, because if you think about all the weird stuff that happens with a Gregorian calendar, like, was that the
Leap years?
Yeah, leap years. February has 28 days. It's just like,
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous because they're just like the stars in the sky and the celestial bodies are not going to move because you need to make a perfect calendar.
Anyways, all right, let's keep going. What do you think about the ideas of like lunar versus solar? Are they contradictory? This is related to what we were just talking about. So, and I mean, the other aspect too that we didn't touch upon was the idea of like linear time versus cyclical time. The meme or the saying that time is a social construct.
Yeah, but I haven't studied enough about time to. I only know that like in Buddhist teachings, it's time is cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas in Western idea of time is that it's linear, it goes from there's always a constant progress towards something.
Right. Well, there's a beginning and there's an end.
Yeah, there's a beginning. There's an end of time because of, I don't know, Christianity. There's an apocalypse eventually.
Yeah.
I mean, Armageddon.
Yeah. I mean, and that's different than like a cyclical view where, like in Buddhist teachings, like Rex was mentioning, where things like repeat on a cycle. And there is no end or beginning. Everything just exists on the same plane until you reach nirvana. Well, until actually we all reach nirvana, but that's a different take. Even Mayan calendars were cyclical in nature too. To plug that in.
So that whole world ending in 2012 was because white people
ran out of space, dude.
Yeah, they ran out of space.
Yep. But yeah, any other thoughts about cyclical versus linear time?
I think all calendars before we had the Gregorian calendar, and even to some extent the Gregorian calendar, it's about celebrating certain days according to the agricultural cycles. So Lunar New Year is, I'm just reading actually on Wikipedia that it's the second moon after winter solstice or something like that. And I don't know what the significance of that is in the agricultural cycle, but the Koreans also traditionally have a big holiday for the Korean harvest. It's like the Korean Thanksgiving in the fall. So I think, most cultures celebrate, have like holidays around harvest and planting and, big events like that around agriculture.
Yeah, that's why. I think that's also why we have two Thuts, even though we only have one New Year. They're both called Thut, one in the spring and one in the fall.
But yeah, I've heard that part about agriculture too, where they use the lunar calendar, like a certain month or whichever in it is when you start planting and then when you start harvesting and stuff. Whereas in the solar or the Gregorian, I would say, I guess you just say, oh, you start planting in spring or whatever, like after the last frost. but it doesn't have a specific date, I would say. It's just when it's spring, when the frost ends. Whereas on the lunar, you can follow the cycle of the moon, or when this moon comes up, when this month comes up, you can start planting. If I recall correctly.
I mean, that makes more sense too. I mean, it's like the Lunar New Year, or the lunar calendar is more in line with like the seasons, and yeah, I would say definitely the harvest. I mean, that's why they call it a harvest moon, right? And that's usually when the season for harvesting happens, and it's kind of like the end of that period. But yeah. Yeah, I seriously don't know where the heck the Gregorian calendar like puts in farming.
I think it's the church's need to like
dominate.
Dominate. I don't recall much of European history. It's just like a lot of a blur to me. But originally, they wanted to like just simplify everything and basically there were a lot of like harvest focused calendars in Europe back then too, but they wanted to simplify it all into this focus on Jesus Gregorian calendar where it just ignores everything in favor of a solar cycle.
So on that note, or going further in our delve into Lunar New Year stuff, have you noticed any changes in the importance of Lunar New Year for Asian Americans in the U.S., or has it more or less stayed the same since growing up? Like, has there been representation in media? How your friends talked about it? I mean, personally, growing up in the Bay Area with a high population of Asian people, we had a lot of people not Asian like celebrate the lunar like New Year festival in San Francisco, doing like lion dancing and things like that. It was a pretty big thing. But that's something that I've seen. But other people?
I don't think the importance has changed. I think it's always been very important. It's like pretty much the biggest holiday for us. But I do think that the impact or the effect has changed, I guess. Like for me, I was also born and raised in the Bay Area. We have a lot more Asian population here, I guess. But so like a lot of people celebrate it, like my neighbors, whatever, friends, family, a lot of people in school. But as the years have gone by, I think more local places, like as opposed to just within immediate families, I say there are more events out and about that celebrate it, or at least acknowledge that it is occurring.
Yeah, so in my family, I would also say that New Year's was the most important holiday for the family as a whole. Probably for kids, maybe Christmas was more exciting, just because of all the hype at school and with friends and stuff. But yeah, for the entire family as a whole, I would say New Year's was the most important holiday. I don't think I see a whole ton of it in popular culture, but I think its popularity and celebrations of it will increase as people kind of get more in touch with their cultures or just learn to celebrate their cultures more. And I'm definitely here for that.
On my part, I think it's a very community-oriented tradition in which, like, an ethnic enclave, like, say, Vietnamese or Chinese would gather, do lion dances in a huge plaza, and also, like, set off firecrackers. And growing up in the Bay Area, I I did go to like a suburban school where it's like a lot of Asians and white folks, but also somewhat diverse as well. The white folks do kind of like want to know how to say gong hai fat choi, but on a whole, it's a more condescension. But being Viet and living in like Fremont, the nearest large Viet community would be San Jose, and every Sunday or Chinese or I'm sorry or Lunar New Year, my family would make a pilgrimage out to San Jose, no matter how ridiculously crowded it gets, and you can never find parking. They would go to like the local plaza, which is Grand Century, where everyone sets off firecrackers and have lion dances, and basically it's a market. And there are like a huge, there is a significant Latino population here in San Jose as well, and they also like join in the festivities of like just setting off firecrackers and basically everyone having a good time. As for like in terms of like popular culture, I think Lunar New Year is actually getting more noticed and more commodified, in that I've seen it show up as like special events in popular role-playing games on the computer. There's that aspect. And since China has taken a bigger role on the world stage, it is getting noticed more. There's also the fact that I've heard, well, no, I've just heard that in China they celebrate it more like a Western New Year, where there's no more lion dances, and that tradition is actually being kept alive by like Chinese and Vietnamese Americans here.
That's very interesting because I just want to speak to a couple things from my experience in India, where that culture, the Indian culture, has a lot of different religions like Christians, Muslims, and Hindu, and everyone. It doesn't matter what religion you fall in. Everyone just joins and participates in each other's holidays, which I think is a great way to get paid time off. I mean, literally, that country had like 2 holidays every month. It was beautiful. But yeah, the sad thing is the commodification of these cultural events into more like streamlined things that you would find in games or whatever is like, I think it's the double-edged sword of people embracing it for the wrong reasons, I think.
Representation.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, that's the only thing I would say. But again, I don't celebrate this, so I can't speak much. I do want to say that hearing about it in the way that you described, both Ji-Young, Rex, and Jackie, it does make me want to participate, but not for the money aspect of the envelope, but more for the sense of preserving each individual Asian country's like unique celebration of this, I think, important, lasting, like I would say, anti-colonial event, because it's something that represents different things for different people in those countries. But anyone want to chime in on that?
You know, when I was a kid, I really didn't know what the significance was. I was just like, oh, I'm wishing my elders a happy new year and I get money. Like that's all. That was the extent of like my understanding of the tradition. But as as an adult, like I really appreciate that my family practiced that tradition and still does practice that tradition, so that we have our own culture and we preserve that culture. Because when I was younger, like I wasn't necessarily proud of my culture. Like I'm older than you guys, and I grew up in a time where there weren't as many Asians in LA as there are now. And I think I don't know if I wanted to be white, but I was definitely trying to fit in as a kid. And yeah, now I just really appreciate like having practiced those traditions, customs, and appreciate still practicing those things.
I remember actually wanting to be white growing up, mostly because of consuming a lot of Western media, and you have this idyllic idea of what the family is like, and my family definitely didn't fit into that sitcom family lifestyle. Not to mention we were kind of dysfunctional and not ideal. So I do remember being white, but the Lunar New Year is one of the many things that did keep me grounded in my culture growing up, and I'm also like really grateful for that.
But for me, I never felt like I needed to be white. Maybe because I never really saw white people in my school. Kind of weird, actually. Now that I think about it, must have had them. Where'd they go? Don't know. I feel like it's good to have participated in it. I mean, there's no way I could not have participated in it. What with my parents both being Chinese and it being so important, and so much of my family being here. But yeah, I guess I'm glad to know these traditions, to be able to keep doing them, albeit possibly differently, given that I am, second gen or something, that I won't be celebrating it quite as extravagantly as my family would normally be, I think, in the future. But I think it's helpful. It helps me connect with other people who celebrate this holiday, even if they do it differently. It's like something you can bond over and be like, oh yeah, we do this too, and like this part's my favorite, or I really like this food or whatever. So it's a good thing, I'd say.
Yeah. So, I mean, on that note, we're kind of winding down in terms of time to look into the future of Lunar New Year and how you want to celebrate it going forward with your friends and family. How does that look for you in, post-COVID times, and beyond? That's a question for everyone, not just Jackie.
Okay, so pre-COVID, I already spilled the whole Shazam, but during COVID, was there one? No, that was when it started, when it hit.
Yeah,
Wuhan, I think
came after.
Yeah, so I think we still celebrated it in the home, man. But for this one, which is coming up, I don't believe everyone's gonna be gathering for it. At most, maybe like some phone calls, maybe some video calls, and we'll probably have some special foods at home, but definitely no giant gathering as before.
Yeah, I feel like that is super sad. My organization, Unity, is actually like passing out a New Year treat. It's a rice cake called mantek for folks in our organization, but I generally don't like the taste of most New Year's food, and I prefer to be able to observe the festivities. So yeah, it's kind of sad that we won't likely be having any sort of like large New Year gathering this year.
What are these Vietnamese foods that you don't like?
They're very similar in that they're just rice cakes called mantek, and they don't taste good in my opinion. People love them. It's just for personal taste. I don't like them very much, but I'm willing to go out and deliver them to my various friends for the sake of the celebration. But in terms of consuming them myself, and not into it so much.
You know what? Koreans actually also eat rice cakes, and there's a particular kind of rice cake that's like round, and
yeah,
in the middle there's sesame
stuffing.
seed.
Yep, ours is wrapped in a banana leaf.
Oh, what a trip! And that was like my grandma's favorite New Year's treat. So that's interesting. Like the similarities between the cultures.
The joy of eating the same stuff is great too, but it's personal preference. I do like seeing people eat it. It's part of the tradition, and sometimes I do have a slice of it myself.
I wouldn't say though that my family practiced these things to be anti-colonial.
Unintentionally anti-colonial. I think just choosing to preserve your culture is unintentionally anti-colonial.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like by embracing the culture that you were born in, I think that inherently is, and I mean, it's not just holidays. It's the food. It's everything. And so I mean that shift that Rex was talking about, going from wanting to be quote unquote white to just recognizing your own culture and his own culture. I think that's kind of well worth preserving and saving.
If the goal of colonial culture is to like colonize and eliminate your culture, even by celebrating some aspect of your culture and not thinking that it's anti-colonial on your conscious brain, it's still an anti-colonial act, just stopping the erasure.
100%, which is why I'm so glad that my mom continued to speak Korean to me, because I, when I went to grade school, I guess the teachers or administrators or whatever, they told my parents to use English in the household. And so when I first went to preschool, I only spoke Korean. And then I slowly learned English. And then in grade school, I was very much bilingual, but I slowly began to use English more because of what my teachers told my parents. So I would speak English to my mom, and my mom would speak Korean to me. But I wish that I was forced to speak Korean in the household. And that in itself is a form of resistance. And my mom was definitely not thinking of it that way, but it definitely was resistance, regardless.
Yeah, I'm glad she did. I mean, same thing with my family. I speak only Thai to my mom. I do not speak English. It actually makes me feel weird and uncomfortable speaking English to my family members. But yeah, so I would say your administrator, Jiyoung, was like, that's an act of colonialism right there.
For sure. It's like this really simplistic view of language where they think that kids can't speak more than one language at a time. And it's like, that's like very uniquely American, because in other countries, people speak, I would say like most people speak more than one language,
Yep. I mean, it's a form of kind of like homogeneity, which is I think dangerous, but that's a different episode. Okay. So I think that's a good place to stop in terms of taking Lunar New Year as a form of resistance.
Okay. So we want to wish all our listeners a happy Lunar New Year. 새해 복 많이 받으세요.
Chúc mừng năm mới.
新年快乐.
And also wish you all a happy and safe New Year, free of COVID.
Well, thanks everyone. So yeah, I think I learned a lot about Lunar New Year. So I appreciate everyone taking the time out, and especially Jackie, who usually never comes on to step in and share with us her experience. Next time, join us when we talk about something else.
Very cool.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of WhatsApp. Remember to like, subscribe, or follow. Be sure to leave a comment, because we always look forward to feedback and enjoy hearing what our listeners have to say.